Hey everyone, welcome back to Dev Radio, where we talk to cloud solution architects about some of the most interesting things you'll see in the Azure space and some of the great projects they're working on. Matt, as always, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Today we got Brad Watts. He's a cloud solution architect with a wide variety of skills and background. But Brad, today we definitely heard that you're doing some really interesting things with Azure Data Explorer and IoT, and that's pretty much two big buzzwords for me. So, Brad, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be on.
Brett, I'm not going to waste too much time. I really want to. I heard you got demos. I've heard you got scenarios. I want to get out the way and let you really run with this. So, Brett, what can you tell us about using Azure Data Explorer in Internet of Things situations?
Yeah, so Azure Data Explorer, it's a PaaS offering that allows you to be able to get insights into a large amount of data, and so you're able to take, it comes into play with IoT, right? So IoT, you're streaming in and you're ingesting a bunch of data, and you need to be able to get insights out of that. Within Azure, we have customers when they're looking at their IoT infrastructure, they're really going two routes, right? One route is that they're buying ready-made solutions, so SaaS offerings. We have those. Microsoft, they may purchase third party, or they want to have more control over their data. And so Azure Data Explorer, that's when that comes into play, because they can have full control over their data, how it looks, how it's shaped. They can get all the insights they need from it using the Custo query language. And so that allows them to have a lot more control over it and to be able to, shape the solution the way that they want it to be shaped. And so when you look at it, Azure, a typical IoT infrastructure is going to have, the data coming in typically through like IoT Hub or Event Hub.
Okay.
And, Azure Data Explorer sits on the back end of that. So even if you have an existing ingestion pipeline, you don't have to change that pipeline. Data Explorer can read from IoT Hub, Event Hub, and ingest that data in. And so what I've got up on the screen here is one of our demo clusters. And before I even jump into the queries, let's just talk a little bit about the experience with Data Explorer. So there's a bunch of different ways to get to the data once it's in Data Explorer. This is our web interface. So you can see up at the top that I'm going to dataexplorer.azure.com. And let me zoom in a little bit where it's a little easier to see. And so when you go here, it'll bring up all the different clusters. You can connect to multiple clusters in one view. There's also a tool you can download, Custo Explorer, that will allow you to connect. You can connect through SDKs if you're doing it through programs to be able to query into it. From the portal itself, from the Data Explorer cluster, you can go into queries. So there's a lot of different ways to get to the data. Today, I'm going to demo it through the Data Explorer web interface. And so you can see up here, if I want to add another cluster, I just go to Add Cluster, and I'm able to add the URI to connect to that cluster. Once you're in there, so this is the cluster, and this particular cluster has one database. So if you're used to browsing relational databases, this looks really similar to like SQL Management Studio, right? So we've got database. We're able to use folders to organize things. So you can use folders, like here's the functions that are available here. Materialized views, which I'll talk about towards the end. External tables, I also talk about that towards the end. And then here's some tables here. Now I can also, if I wanted to organize my tables, I can put tables under folders too. But this is a similar view. And so when I look at a table, you'll see the different columns that are in there. And so Data Explorer is going to index each one of those columns. So that's what makes, that's really the power of the query engine, is the fact that it indexes each one of those columns. So we're able to handle, partially formatted, semi-formatted, and then pretty much free text, right? So we're able to handle all of that type of data. And so let's go over to the query, and let's just start looking at some of the query stuff. So number one, before I do this queries that are in the window, there's two types of command, or two types of things you can do in this window. One's called a control command. And so if I do a dot, they always start with dot. And so if I want to see the cluster, I can do dot show and then it'll show me all the different stuff I can do, right? So there's a strong IntelliType that will help you with any of these. So if I just want to see what does my cluster look like that I'm going to be doing this query against, I can take that and then I can run that particular query. And you'll see here, this is going to be there's going to be a small cluster, right? This is just a 2-node cluster. And, this is PaaS solution, but you can see the boxes that are on the back end. But you don't have to worry about doing the updates or anything like that for those boxes. It'll auto scale up and down according to what you need. So, we're going to run these queries against, just a 2-node cluster. You can see, I believe, that if we look at this processor count, each one of them has 16 CPUs. So what we've got for this one, and this is a typical scenario, is I'm just going to take this stage table that we have in here. And so ideally, this is the table that the data lands in. And so if I just take a look at this, I'm going to limit it to 10 so we can just look at the data. And so if we look at this, let's just look at one row. This is typically how data will land from like IoT devices. And you can see some of the metadata here, but if I go down to the body really has a lot of the data that I want in there. And for these, we got the temperature, we got the humidity, and then the battery level. And so I want to flatten those out. And so if you look in our thermostat table, this is going to have the same data, except it's flattened out. So for each one of the data points, we're going to have a column for those, the battery level, the temp, and the humidity, instead of having it in that dynamic column.
So,
And
Brad,
so,
looking at this example, that stage IoT raw data, that body is like the payload from your IoT device, right?
that's right.
And then the thermostats is just flattening out into that column format. That's more like a relational database. That's more it's something that we can query and report on pretty accurately.
That's right. And so what we're doing is we're running what we call an update policy. And so as data lands into the stage IoT raw data, it's flattening it out and putting it into that thermostats table. And
Awesome.
so what a lot of customers will do is they'll have this stage IoT raw have a 0-day retention, and then whatever you really want to keep the data is in this thermostat table. And so you're able to do some light transformations. And so let's just see how much data we have in this thermostat table. So if we run this, you can see that we've got 7 million rows that are in there. And so once we see that, we can go in, and what I'll do is I'll comment out this one, and this will be sort of a typical scenario. And so this is the Kusto language, and when you look at it, so we're looking at, the first thing is going to be the table that you're wanting to query. We're going to look at everything newer than 7 days. And then what we're going to do is we're going to get the average temperature in 30-minute aggregates. And we want that for each device. And we will chart that as a time chart. So if I run this is going to go across all of that data, and you can see that across, and we can see, okay, this is all those different devices, right? And so I may want to dig into one of those. So for instance, here's one that's, device ID. And so what I'll do is instead of going into the graph, I'll go into the table. And then let me just real quick sort it by the average temperature. And I'll grab this device ID. So I'm just going to copy this device ID and then change it up here. I'm going to uncomment that. And so now I'm just looking at the one device. Mm-hmm. And so let's just run that and look at that graph. And so we can see, looking at this really quickly, that something changed with that device, right? So looking at the temperature, it's pretty steady going across. And then we get this modulation going up and down. The nice thing about the query language is this is meant to explore that data, right? And so I can very easily go in and, okay, I'm looking at 30-minute aggregates. Let's look at 5-minute aggregates. So I just changed 30 to 5M. Let's run that query, and it'll pop back up in the screen, and you'll see it in 5-minute aggregates. And so I could go up and I could change the time range, do different things to explore the data, be able to get insights and sort of drill into the data as I go.
Yeah.
So another common scenario is we're expecting data to come from these sensors every minute. And so what I may want to see is there any missing data from those devices? And so what I did to find the missing devices is I made a series, and we're looking at the average temperature again. But this time the default's 0. And so what happens if I run this query, I can very easily see from this graph everywhere where I have a 0, I'm missing data, right? So the data didn't come in during that time. And what I can actually do to actually make this chart better, right, is I want to ignore those zeros. And so what I'll do is up until this point, this is the same query that I ran up above. Now what I'm going to do is fill that in. So fill those gaps in using this series fill linear. And I'm going to fill that average temperature. So now this chart, which is hard to read because you have those zeros coming in, now if I do it, it filled it linearly and it's more of a useful chart.
Okay.
So now let's look at some of the stuff that people get sort of really interested in. We'll look at a couple queries. The first query is going to be for forecasting. This just forecast out 1 hour, I believe. And so if you look at this one, we're using this series decompose forecast. And so we're going to forecast out. So if I run this, we're looking at this temperature. And I think it actually is 15-minute forecast on this one. But anyway, when you look at this, you'll see that we have a forecast line here, and that forecast line goes out further than the actual data that's in there. And so it's used in the telemetry for however long that you choose to go back. So it's taking a look at what the typical, what the trend is for this temperature coming in, and it's forecasting that out according to how long you want to forecast it out.
So it looks like each query you're just appending and adding more functionality or making little small changes, so you can kind of build your queries up as you just start to identify and solve business problems.
Yeah, exactly. So that's really the power of it is you're starting, you're building on queries, right? So you're starting with a query, and as you explore the data, you're not having to go back and rewrite the whole query.
Yeah.
You're just feeding additional commands or filters into that query. Now this is another one. This is probably more common than the forecasting out is detecting anomalies, right? So that's a big thing with customers is they've got this data set and they want to know if there's been any anomalies. And so we can use, so up above, you see we used a series decompose forecast. Here we're using series decompose anomalies and we're feeding in that data. So when we look at this, and we have a visualization that's an anomaly chart. And so this allows you to really easily see from that data where your anomalies are. And so for each anomaly, you have that dot in there, right? And so you've got some that are anomalies high, then you have some that are anomalies low. And you can very easily see from this where those anomalies are. The other thing I'll mention while I'm in here is like if you have a query like this where you sort of dug into the data, you've got a query that's useful, you can easily do a couple things, right? So number one, I can go up to file and I can save it or I can export it to a CSV. I can also go over to share. This is really useful. So I can link the query to a clipboard. And so then I can go over to my email and include this in the email. Even nicer than that, I can actually include the results. And so if I go and I click on this, what will happen is when you paste that into your email, not only is it going to give you the results, but it'll give them a link, so a deep link that when they click on it, it'll open up the Kusto Explorer with that query already in there. And so they can go run the query themselves. You can also pin this to an Azure, to a ADX dashboard, I should say. And so ADX has a dashboarding. So if we go over here, we have the dashboarding here. Actually, I've minimized that. So I guess I should. So here's the dashboarding. And so if I pin that to a dashboard, it's going to go to a dashboard here. I can also send it over to Power BI. And so all of those are available under the share. And then so I'm going to skip this query, but the last thing I'll talk about is materialized views because they become really useful with like IoT data. And so materialized view allow you to do is typically is for aggregates. There's well, I won't say two main scenarios, but two common scenarios. Is one, I want aggregates, right? So I have this IoT data, and so I commonly want to get the hourly aggregate or the daily aggregate. And so I could do that in a query every time, but it's more useful to have that in a materialized view. And so then I can query that materialized view and get that instantaneously. And the other common scenario is, okay, I've got all these devices. I want the last record for each one. So what's the current temperature? What's the current humidity? And so that may be like in this one, we've got the current view. The thing that's really nice about the materialized view is that with the materialized view, every time it runs on the back end and it keeps that materialized view up to date. It's only looking at the delta. So every time it keeps the data up to date, it's only the new data that's been inserted into Data Explorer. And then the materialized view, it can have a different retention period. It can have a different caching period too. So for instance, my raw data, I may keep 14 days in cache and 30 days in total retention. And I may create materialized views off of that raw data. And for those materialized views, I may keep 60 days in cache and 3 years for retention. And so you can do that with those materialized views. So even though the raw data is being deleted out of the system, the materialized views will still have those aggregates available for you. And so if I look at this one, so these are like hourly aggregates. And so I'm able to query that and then run, just like anything else, I'm able to pop that in and run queries against that, just like it's any other table. And if I
Yeah,
look at this, I'll go ahead.
I was going to say, Brad, for those who are watching the show who's not that familiar with the terminology, this is that raw IoT data coming in, averaged up by the hour, and then put into another view, or so that when you query it, you're just querying by the hour instead of having to query the raw data. It's again, having the materialized views and be able to work with them natively right here within KQL is just pretty awesome.
Yep. Yep. And so, when you look at that, if this will actually come back. Yeah, so when we look at this, instead of having the every minute data coming in, these are just aggregates. So you can see here that this is just hourly aggregates. So we have 1900 for this particular device, and then that was the average, battery level, temperature, and humidity for that particular hour. And so now, I'm able to query that just like a table. So I don't have to just, get that data. I can, look for certain things and project certain things and render it certain ways.
Absolutely.
This is another common one. So this is like the current temperature, right? So if we look at this we'll have a row for each device, and this is the current battery level, temperature, and humidity. And so this is something common that people want on their dashboard, right? So I'll pull up a dashboard. It gives me the very last reading for each one of those IoT devices.
Yeah, super useful.
The last thing, I won't actually run this query because it takes a little bit longer to run, but you can query stuff that's in blob storage, right? And so I can have what we call external tables. And so if I wanted to, export data into blob, then I can reach over into blob and I can query that. Of course, you're going to take a performance hit. You don't have all the indexing and all the stuff that comes with the data that's in Data Explorer. But it is a capability that's useful, right? So I can do continuous exports to blob, for instance, and then if I need to query older data, I can go out and I can query that using the external table.
Okay, yeah, very useful. So yeah, this again, all really cool. We're gonna make sure we include a link to the Data Explorer, dataexplorer.azure.com, in the description box so that people who are watching this video can go, try it out for themselves. Brad, if somebody wanted to get started with this, any other sources you would recommend to go check out?
Yeah, so the number one, if you're wanting to dig deep into it, our documents. So if you just go to Azure Documents, they've got everything you could want. There's walkthroughs on how to ingest data from different sources, how to do different queries, things like that. When we look at it, people can connect to this demo cluster. So there's a demo cluster that is available for anybody to connect to and run queries against. If you don't want to ingest it and you just want to play with the query language, you can definitely connect to it and do those queries. And then we have our YouTube channel. So I would suggest everybody following, if you just go to YouTube and look up the channels and look for Azure Data Explorer, will pop up and make sure you follow that channel because they're all the time posting useful, 10-minute videos on there.
Well, Brad, thank you so much for coming on. We're going to make sure we have links in the description box for everything you just shared. For everyone else, we go live quite often on Dev Radio. So make sure you subscribe to our channel, set up notifications so that you know when we go live next. And you can be part of one of these live sessions and ask questions in real time. So, Brad, again, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. And we'll see you all next time.